My third child, Christopher, spent several years homeless on the streets of Los Angeles, addicted to fentanyl. I'm going to share a little bit of his story, ultimately how it led to a song, so we're tying it into songwriting, but the reality is that's going to be the little portion at the end. I'm going to give you his story, my story, as one of the most harrowing and terrifying experiences that I've ever been through. It's something I would never wish on anyone. And I know there are a number of people, several people who have reached out to me based on some things I've written about in this, that have a loved one who is an addict and they're going through the same thing. And the first thing I want to share, and this is important, first of all, spoiler alert. We had dinner with Christopher yesterday for his birthday. It's actually in November was his birthday, but we were sick with the flu, so it took this long for us to finally get him out to dinner. Spoiler alert, he survived being addicted to fentanyl and having some of the most severe medical issues that addiction can cause. So I want to share some of that story. But what I want to say to those people who may have an addict that they care about, that they are losing hope over, I wish I could offer you something, some advice on how we did it, but we didn't do it, right? I don't have any answers to get your addict not to use or to not to relapse or any of those things. That's out of my power. That's completely on them. They have to do that. I can share what we did and the attitude adjustment that I had, spurred on by something my oldest son, Christopher's brother, had sent to me and encouraged me to do. We'll talk about that. I wish I had answers, but I tell people all the time, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just kind of muddling through all of this, just like everyone else is. So first, a little bit about Christopher. Christopher had a number of behavioral problems from the time he was very young. First of all, and also Christopher has given me permission to share this story. He shares the story, he thinks it can be valuable. Sometimes we've both been at events and spoken a little bit about it, whether it's NA events or AA or the things like that. And this month he'll have his 3-year cake for sobriety. So that towards the end of the month we're going to celebrate that. But in any case, Christopher was just challenging as a child. Now, he was a really cute and fun kid, super friendly, talkative. He talks a lot. That'll play a part in his addiction story. But I'll give you a quick example. He was with his mom at Subway getting sandwiches when he was very young, maybe 5 years old or something like that. And a guy came into the Subway, punk rocker, big mohawk, colorful hair, skater guy. And Chris just thought this guy was the coolest thing ever. So he got up from the table at 5 and went up and just goes, "Man, I love your hair," and started talking to the guy. He was really friendly, and the guy was super cool with him. And Chris walks back to the table and he goes, "Another day, another friend." So that was kind of how he was his whole life. Even with the behavioral challenges, getting kicked out of virtually every high school he was in, his teachers were always shocked because they said he's not angry, he's super nice, he talks to us, but Chris would just let his exuberance get in the way of things. If he got kids laughing, then he couldn't turn that off. He would just keep going, and the kids would start to get annoyed because they're getting in trouble, and they'd tell him to stop, and he got a laugh, so he's just going to keep going, and that would lead to, sometimes altercations, right? And then he was always shocked. He goes, "I don't know why they're angry. They were laughing." And I said, "Well, you got to learn to meter it." He started using drugs pretty early. Now, understand, I'm not a big don't do drugs. People can use recreational drugs all they want. I'm not a big moralistic, drugs are bad. It's always to the individual. It's like I can have a small glass of wine and I know people who can't touch anything, right? So for an addict, and for Christopher, everything he did led to problems. It didn't matter if it was marijuana, it didn't matter, and he was never a drinker, but what happened is there was just no metering for him. So if something was put in front of him, he was going to try it. If he liked it, he was going to keep doing it. At 18, I had to kick Christopher out of my home. He ended up making it to a family friend's and living with him for a while. He was struggling in so many different areas. He was encouraged to go to the Army, We kind of helped that happen. He went to the Army. After a few years, he got in trouble there too and was sent home. It was not a dishonorable discharge, and that plays a part in his recovery. But soon after that, he began using heroin, and that's when he had used meth, but he moved to heroin, started using needles, and this really became the impetus or catalyst that led to him being on the streets. He ended up robbing that family friend and getting caught and going to jail. And so there was about a year of, in and out of jail, court dates, all those things. And, that was, of course, difficult. And then Christopher got out of jail and disappeared onto the streets. And for a long time, I didn't look for him. I think his mother and I were both just so worn out from all the back and forth that we just had given up even trying. At some point I said, I want to find out where he is. I just wanted to check on him. And we knew he had been in Santa Monica, Venice area, which has a big homeless community, a lot of addicts. But then we also knew he had been around MacArthur Park in downtown LA. Anybody familiar with MacArthur Park knows it's a pretty rough area. As a matter of fact, it's very interesting. Down there are street vendors all over around MacArthur Park, and they're selling things like tennis shoes and toiletries, deodorant, toothpaste, things like that. All the goods that they're selling are sold to them by the homeless, and the homeless go out and go boosting. Boosting is the term for going out and robbing places, going to a Target and getting deodorants, and that's why in those areas those things are all locked up. What Chris explained to me is oftentimes they just pay $20 to a security guard or whoever might have keys, and that person will open it up for them and they'll steal those items. Then they turn around and sell those to the vendors on the street. So there's a whole underground economy. It's really kind of interesting. I say now that having spent a lot of time with the homeless, that they're just a microcosm of humanity, a very intense microcosm of humanity. Everything is amplified in some ways, but the same dysfunction is in regular society as it is in there. It's just at different levels. I started to look for Christopher, and at that time, his oldest brother had sent me a video, Johann Hari's video, Everything You Thought You Knew About Addiction Was Wrong. It's a TED Talk, and I'll have it linked below, as well as some things I've written about Christopher's addiction. I'll have those linked below. These are all, once again, Chris has given, tacit permission. We had dinner, like I said, dinner last night. He said, of course, and he wants this story told. As a matter of fact, there's a documentary being made about his addiction and recovery, and there's also, he's in another documentary, we're both in it, about, because Christopher ended up having a stroke. Once again, we'll get to that story. So his oldest brother had encouraged me. He said, if you find Chris, when you find him, don't lecture him. That's not helping. He has a community out there. The community accepts him. He needs to know he has a family as well, and that you accept him. Doesn't mean you have to take him in and have him live in your home, but don't sit there lecturing him. That hasn't worked for all the years prior. It leads to a lot of conflict, and you don't need to change him. He's an adult. Instead, you can share your concerns, you can share your fears, but just go out there and be a dad. That was a pretty difficult transition, because I'd been trying to keep Chris functionally on the straight and narrow, and we've had some intense interactions through high school and after that. But I said, okay, I'm going to make this effort after watching Johann Hari's TED Talk, after reading his book, Chasing the Scream. I said, I got to look at addiction differently. And I began looking for him, both out in Santa Monica and then around MacArthur Park. And what I would do is I'd just walk around with my cell phone, and I'd have a picture of him. I'd go up to addicts, and I'd say, do you recognize this kid? And addicts, that community is pretty closed off. They don't share a lot of information. But what happened one day is I was near MacArthur Park at a Staples, and in the parking lot there was an African-American couple, a little bit older, so closer in age to me than some of the addicts that we'd find out there. And I approached them. They were meth addicts, I could tell. There's ways you could tell, both in the talkativeness and other characteristics. But he was very friendly, and I just went up to him and I said, look, I'm his father. This is my son, Chris. I'm just trying to check on him. He's not in trouble. I'm not trying to, cause any issues. And the guy looked at his picture and looked at me and he said, yeah, I know. And that caused a reaction in me, almost like fear, a sickening fear, but also excitement, because it's weird to walk up to an addict and have him recognize your kid. And also I was excited because I was closer to finding him possibly. The way I knew he knew Christopher and was talking about him, that he wasn't lying to me, is he said, yeah, he's very funny and he talks a lot. And I talk a lot, so the apple didn't fall far from that tree. He said to me, across from MacArthur Park, there's a Yoshinoya restaurant, fast food restaurant. And he said, go there in the evening, in the parking lot behind the Yoshinoya. That's where the fentanyl addicts meet. And your son's a fentanyl addict. And that also just causes your heart to drop, even though we kind of knew. It was just like, okay, there's a whole sub-community. In the homeless community, it's a community, and then there are sub-communities of whatever drug they use. That gave me a place to start. So I went to the Yoshinoya several evenings. I talked to people in the area, did not see him or find him. I think one guy alluded to the fact that he hadn't seen him in that area in over a month. And I didn't know if he was being honest with me or not, because once again, they can be very protective. I was always very careful and respectful. Like, I wasn't out there trying to judge anybody. I wasn't out there trying to create any problems. So I met gang members and drug dealers and other addicts, and they were relatively cool with me, and they got used to seeing me around there, and I would talk to them. And I was up at around the corner from that Yoshinoya, there's a Jack in the Box, and that Jack in the Box has just around there rough area. And so I was up at the Jack in the Box just seeing if I could talk to anybody, and I saw these two addicts walking down from the Jack in the Box, and one of them was he looked new to the streets, pretty straight looking, and then behind him this guy had tattoos all over his body, all over his face and head, shaved head. And I held up my son's picture and I said, hey, do you guys recognize this guy? I'm his dad, I'm just looking for him. And I could tell that they both recognized him. But the first guy, the straight looking guy, he kind of said, the more cleaned up guy, he said, he goes, I don't know him, but it's nice that you're looking for him, because most people, they just abandon us out here and they don't care about us or whatever. He said something like that. And as he's saying that, the guy with all the tattoos is behind him shaking his head like this, and he says, that's all bullshit. We're out here because we want to be here. And I thought, wow, that's kind of this remarkable honesty coming from this guy, very, very raw. And he said, yeah, I know your kid. He said, you might want to look around Vermont and Beverly. You'll find him up there. And Vermont and Beverly is a street corner a few miles away from where we were. Big homeless community out there. There's right around the corner from Vermont and Beverly, there's what's called the PATH building. PATH is an organization that helps the homeless. So there's a big homeless community out there, right close by the PATH building. So we headed out there and I started looking around Vermont and Beverly a few different days. And one day I was near the PATH building and I saw this guy in this field and I knew he was a drug dealer. And I went up to him and I said, look, I'm looking for my son. His name is Chris. Do you recognize him? He's not in trouble. My whole spiel. And the guy looked at it and he said, I don't know him. Once again, I knew the guy wasn't telling me the truth, but there's no point in, you can't get angry if you push back like that. They're going to shut down anyways. So I just said, okay, I'm going to keep looking. And I just said to him, look, I'm his dad. If you see him, his name is Chris. Can you just have him check in with me? Can you have him give me a call? Tell him I love him and that I just want to hear from him. And then I went back to the car and I was pretty dejected. And then I hear the guy coming up behind me and he says, hey, go over to the Hoover Street overpass, which is around the corner. He said, you'll find him there. And so we drove over there and there were two young women, homeless addicts that were out there, and I walked up to them. I said, hey, I was told I may find my son over here. I'm looking for my son. I showed them a picture. I said, once again, he's not in trouble, just trying to find him. And her face kind of lit up. She goes, oh, it's Chris. Yeah, he's one of the good ones, which is kind of nice to hear, a weird thing to hear on the streets. I'll tell you something else funny she told me later that was very ironic. But she said, yeah, I know where he is, but you stay here. I'm going to go check with him and see if he wants to come out. And I said, okay. And she said, he talks about you a lot, which is, once again, nice to hear. It was weird. So she went off, and a few minutes later she came back and she said, he wants to see you, but he wants to get cleaned up, so just wait here for a little bit. And so a few minutes later, Chris came out, and I hadn't seen him in a long time, so I gave him a hug, told him I loved him, and we talked for a little bit. I walked over to the 7-Eleven with him, bought him some toiletries, and then I just said, hey, let people know that you're okay with me finding you, so that they don't tell me they don't know where you are or whatever. And he said, oh yeah, I'll do that. And so it became easier to find him. There were still times it was difficult because Chris was not good at staying in one place. He would move around a lot, and he wasn't really good at maintaining a tent or anything like that. I bought him several tents. I got tents from a homeless organization, but he would just turn around and sell everything for drugs within 24 to 48 hours. He'd get cell phones and sell those. So that was kind of the gist of things, but we had found him, and that was a big deal. And I went back, and the end of that day, what was kind of funny is that young woman, that Chris went back to where he was, and we were getting ready to leave, and she comes up to me and she goes, hey, you're a really good dad. And I thought, I'm driving away from my son who's homeless on the street. I don't feel like a good dad. Like, there's nothing in there that pulls some redeeming quality of dadhood out of that. But she said, we kind of view you like the Leave It to Beaver family of the streets, because he's always talking about you. And I thought, I don't remember the episode of Leave It to Beaver where Beav was behind the Yoshinoya shooting up, but whatever. So it was just there were these weird experiences. Christopher started getting sick, and he started getting infections. Those infections became very severe. It started with cellulitis. His arm started swelling up. He got an abscess in there. They had to drain it, get him on antibiotics. But this is what happens with homeless on the streets and infection. They don't treat it well because they go to the hospital, and the hospital gives them antibiotics, and they lose the antibiotics. They don't remember to take them, whatever the case may be. And so the infection just becomes drug resistant. It just gets worse and worse. And this was true to form with Christopher. He started getting sicker and sicker. He got cellulitis on his foot, on his arm, kept coming back. He would go to the hospital. Sometimes they'd want to admit him and keep him there, but every addict leaves AMA against medical advice because they get IV antibiotics for 24 hours. They feel better, and maybe the swelling has gone down, but now they're dope sick. They need drugs, so they leave. And Chris did this multiple times. I would go to the hospital and say, can you please just dose him with fentanyl, a low dose, and taper it off, because we're trying to treat the infection, not the, we're not trying to treat his addiction. That's not the goal right now. This led to Chris getting an infection that ultimately got into his bloodstream called septicemia. It's kind of a precursor to sepsis. It attacked his spine, and that resulted in him needing a spine reconstruction surgery, a fusion. And you would think that would be it, that he spent several weeks in the hospital, and he actually went to the VA's domiciliary. Once again, these surgeries happened at the VA, and we're so thankful that he had the VA as a resource. It's been a lifesaver, literally a lifesaver. And so he went to their domiciliary, and he was there for 6 months, and we'd visit him every week, and he was clean and he was happy. But then 6 months later, he relapsed while he was at the domiciliary, and they sent him to another facility, said, if you make it, you got to go 30 days through this rehab facility, and then we'll take you back into the domiciliary. He made it at that rehab facility maybe 5 days, and then he ended up blowing out of the program, ended up back on the streets. And very soon after that, the infection came back, and it proceeded to get worse and worse. And he was in and out of hospitals. I've been in every emergency room in downtown LA, the Good Samaritan, Hollywood Presbyterian, which has tons of addicts, Kaiser up there, just all over. We've been in all of them. And they know Christopher. He was in Cedars-Sinai, as a matter of fact, at one point, literally left pulling IVs out of his arm in a hospital gown and just went back onto the streets. So this happened all the time. And during one incident, I won't say which hospital, he was in the hospital, and he always was very open about it. He'd call me, he'd let the doctors talk to me, he didn't hide anything. And the doctors said, I get a call one day, and they said, your son's threatening to leave AMA, he wants drugs. And so I get Chris on the phone, and these were not gentle conversations. I wasn't like, could you please stay, Chris? He said, Dad, I need drugs, I'm gonna leave. And I go, the fuck you are, you're getting back in bed, get back in bed. And he said, I need drugs. And I said, I'll get you something. Let me talk to the doctor. And he goes, I'll stay for a little bit, but I'm gonna leave if I don't get something. So I talked to the doctor, can you please just give him a low dose of fentanyl and keep him in the hospital? And the doctor's like, I can't do that. Now, I think this should be standard practice, but that's another conversation. And so I told the doctor, look, I'm gonna go out on the streets, I'm gonna buy fentanyl, I'm gonna come into your hospital, I'm gonna dose him, I'm gonna keep him there. And the doctor said, I kind of agree with your approach. And he goes, here's what I'll do. When you get here, I'll send him downstairs for a cigarette break. And he can get what he needs, and you send him back up here. To me, that's a good doctor. Once again, I won't share where that was, because nobody should get in trouble over this. That was a good decision on his part. But what it led to me doing was going out on the streets and buying fentanyl. And I knew where Chris's drug dealers hung out, a guy named East Coast and Tweedy. I didn't know them yet. And so I went up to them, and I walked up to, I didn't know if it was East Coast or Tweedy, and I said, hey, I'm looking for East Coast or Tweedy. I'm Chris Moran's dad. He's, you call him Bigfoot. They call him Bigfoot because he had a swollen foot. Or OD Chris, because he had OD'd like 7 or 8 times on the streets and been brought back with Narcan. And the guy looked at me and he said, I don't know who you're talking about, and I don't know who East Coast or Tweedy are. And I knew he was lying. But once again, fighting and battling that's just going to cause that community to shut down and not share with me when I need them to. So I just said, okay, I'm going to find another fentanyl dealer. And I was walking away, and then I hear this, hey, sweetheart. And it's this trans friend of Chris named Tasha. And I'd met Tasha before, and Tasha had actually called me from the streets when Chris was in trouble, saying, hey, he's really sick, you need to come get him. So Tasha was a friend of Chris, and Tasha was very flamboyant and funny. A tragic story, I won't even get into that, but she said, what are you doing out here? And I said, Chris is in the hospital, he's threatening to leave. And she knew how Chris was, and she's like, oh my gosh, he never takes care of himself. And I said, I'm just trying to get him some fentanyl because I'm going to go to the hospital, I'm going to give him a dose so he stays. And she said, honey, you're too loud and you look like a cop. And it made me laugh, but she said, I'll go take care of it. And she walked off with my $20, and she came back with the fentanyl. I gave her like $10 or something for that, and she said, anytime you need something, you come out and look for me, I'll make sure you're taken care of. And so that's a weird part about the community is they look out for each other, and at the same time, they'll bring each other back if they OD. They all carry Narcan, they all have it out there, but they also steal from each other and are looking for, if they want drugs, they're going to do whatever they need to get those drugs. So I did go to the hospital, and Chris did come down, and I watched him shoot fentanyl right in my car, and then I brought him back into the hospital. Now, ultimately, he still blew out of that a day or two later, disappeared, and this ultimately led to him getting progressively sicker. And eventually, I'd gone out there one time and just saw how sick he was. I couldn't get him to go to the hospital, to the VA hospital with me. And I gave up hope, and I said, I can't go out there anymore. It's just, I'm watching my son die. As a matter of fact, his brother had come out earlier and to visit him, found him, and was basically saying goodbye, because we were certain Chris would not be with us. And Chris was, like I say, very sick. His back was, bending, he was not able to walk well because the infection was back in his spine. And it was going to cause him to be paralyzed. And there's a woman out there named Ellen who helps the homeless. She has a organization called Textwich, and she has an addict son as well. And she helps parents and other loved ones find their addict if they're on the streets of LA. She's very good at it. I found Chris on my own, but she and I had run into each other a couple different times, and she had spoken to Chris's mom, my ex-wife. Ellen knew Chris and had run into him several times after he had relapsed. And in late December 2021, she called Chris's mom and said, Chris cannot move. He can't speak. He's laying on a mattress, dying. And he was just laying in filth. And his mom called me and said, would you come down with me and get him? And I said, I'm not going back down there. I can't do it. And so I didn't go. I still carry a little bit of shame about this, but she did. And with the help of some EMTs, she got him into the hospital. And so I said, okay, I'm going to go down and see him. And she said, he can't talk, he can't move. And then I was driving down there, and she called me and said, you can't go down there, he's got COVID, he's in isolation. I couldn't see him for a while, and then that night around 2 a.m, the doctor called me, and the doctor said, your son's having seizures, and he's had some strokes, and the prognosis is grim. And the prognosis is grim is one of the weirdest, just disheartening, terrifying things you could hear a doctor say to you. And I said, well, what percentage? What's his chance of surviving? And the doctor said, we don't really think in terms of percentages. We think in terms of what can go wrong. And right now, your son's heart valve is infected, and he's got what are called septic emboli. And every time his heart beats, it's spreading them around his body, and they've lodged in his brain, causing the strokes. They're in his kidneys, they're in his liver, so he could have any number of, he could stroke out, the infection could kill him, his kidneys could fail, any number of things could go wrong. And they said, we just don't know what's going to happen. We wanted to prepare you. So for several days, well, really about almost 10 days, about 8 days, it was very touch and go. And when people would ask me, hey, how's Chris doing? I would say, he didn't die today, so that's good. That's the best I've got. And he made it through that. And then what's interesting in talking to Christopher is, as he was laying there and he found out what happened to him, that he had a stroke, that he couldn't walk, his first thought was, this is going to make it difficult to get drugs, which is wild. But over the next few weeks, he became really scared. He's like, whoa, I had strokes. And he was learning to talk again, and then he had to get on a walker, and he had to have a heart valve replacement. They had to do surgery on his back again. He's had a couple of those. Fast forward to today, just so you know, Christopher was like a skeleton when I saw him on the streets, or when I saw him in the hospital the first time, just wasting away to nothing. He's now, plus 200 pounds, huge arms, goes to the gym all the time. He's currently got a job, living on his own, has been living on his own for over a year. He lived with us for a while and had to learn to walk again and all those things, but he's really taken this battle on and is doing well. So that's the summary of the story, and my encouragement is, if you have someone who's an addict, treat them with some gentleness, and yourself as well, but you don't have to take them into your home, but stop the lecturing. It's pointless. It just frustrates you, it frustrates them and creates a barrier. You can express your fears, but don't spend all your time there. Just understand that they're doing what they can do. I don't think addiction is the choice people believe it is. I think people that struggle with that have far less agency over what they're doing, and it takes some extreme things sometimes for them to get clean. And also, I can't promise that things don't turn out awful, because we know people who have died on the streets, friends of Christopher's that are no longer here with us. So I'm not here to give good news or encouragement, or it's not that kind of a thing. People used to say, oh, you have to be positive, and I go, whether I'm positive or negative is irrelevant. So I'm in a holding pattern. That was the best I could do. I did mention how this would lead to a song. So when I was out on the streets, after I'd first found Christopher, we had gone out there around Christmas time, and I would bring socks and things to those people on the streets. And we were out there delivering some things to his homeless friends. Socks are a big thing. Most people on the streets don't need food. And there's ways to get food on the streets. There are resources for that. But they don't take care of foot health. And foot health kind of becomes a big thing. If you're wearing the same socks or no socks, just inside dirty shoes, for 6 months, you're going to get some kind of foot infection. And that foot infection can spread and it can become extremely severe. So I would just bring socks. I'd go to the 99-cent store and I'd buy socks, and I'd just buy 15, 20 pair of socks. And actually, eventually, I think my third time, whatever, I was at that 99-cent store, the guy goes, "Why are you buying socks every week?" Like just different random, whatever socks they had. And I told him I was giving them to the homeless. My son was out there, and so he started giving me socks every time I came to buy it. So if I bought 15 socks, he'd give me 15 socks. And I really appreciate that. But while I was out there, it was around Christmas time, just a few days before Christmas. As a matter of fact, it's in my songwriting journal. First song I wrote in this journal that my daughter had given me, same year, 2021. The first song I wrote, it says Christmas song right up there. And I was out there and I saw these young women that were on the streets, and I wrote this first couple verses. I said, "We've got goodwill when we need it, holiday cheer when it's convenient. Peace on earth as the bombs drop, blessed be the poor till the sales stop." Which I know is very cynical sounding, but the chorus kind of redeems it a little bit. And then I wrote, "There's a baby, there's a mother, there's the freeway they're living under. Carries the same day package delivery. For all of that I've been good, what will it get me?" And I was just kind of looking at this juxtaposition of everybody on the freeway, doing their Christmas thing, right? There were, Amazon trucks or FedEx trucks and people driving. And then below the freeway was this humanity that is mostly unseen or ignored, or, just people are annoyed and frustrated with, which I understand. The homeless can be frustrated. Addicts are frustrating. So anybody that wants to be compassionate toward the homeless, which I try to be, that also says they're not annoying and dirty and a nuisance, they're just lying, right? Because they are. That's just the reality. And so we need to have a compassionate approach, but we also need to be aware that it is a problem to have outside your business a bunch of tents and people, needles and drugs. It's a problem. So we have to find a way to resolve this. And I don't have the answers. I have some ideas, but beyond the scope of this video. The song is really about the fact that the chorus comes out and says, "Deck the halls starts with where I am. Help me change those things I can. Let me see on this silent night my brother in a stranger's eyes, and let me take their hands and take my part, sharing hope and love with a Christmas heart." So that's the song. So it's really an encouragement that if I want to change some of the things I see in the holiday season or elsewhere, whenever, that it comes down to my attitude and my behavior. And so I tried to do that with the homeless community, and I do try to take that message to heart. In any case, that's what led to the song Christmas Heart. It was this part of this harrowing journey of addiction and homelessness with somebody very close to me. And if this story in any way encourages you to have a little more compassion for the homeless or the addict, or if you're an addict, or if you're a recovering addict, or you're dealing with it, I'd love to know. Leave a comment. You can look in the description, the description. I have links to some things I've written about it on my Substack, Addict Son, Addict Family, because I believe if there's an addict in your family, your whole family's an addict family. Just the way it works, it infuses or infects everything. And then some other articles as well. I'll also have a link to my contact form, because I know people have reached out when they've heard this story. And if you want to do that, once again, I can't give great advice. I can tell you things I tried to do, and the most important one being that I just stopped trying to fix things. And that may be the best thing we can do, both for ourselves and for our addict. But I appreciate you tuning in, and hope this wasn't too long or boring. And if you're interested, subscribe to my channel. I want to do more life perspective videos as well. And if you found it interesting, or you know somebody who's dealing with addiction, share, in the family, share the video with them as well. Thanks.
There's a baby, there's a mother, there's the freeway they're living under. Carries the same day package delivery for all that I've been good. Now what will it get me? Dick the hall starts with where I am. Help me change those things I can. Let me see on this silent night my brother in a stranger's eyes, and let me take their hands and take my part, sharing hope and love with the Christmas heart.